Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Pittsburgh Current Election Night Live. I am editor and publisher Charlie Deitch, and I am here live tonight with Erin McClelland, political strategist, former political candidate, all-around great person. Yeah, all that stuff. And you're also going to hear tonight from our political columnist, Kierran Young, who has been out at the polls all day and who is hitting up all of the parties this evening. So thanks for joining us tonight. Polls just closed in Allegheny County. And so if history is any indicator, Erin, next half hour, 20 minutes, we'll probably get the first results. Maybe a little more longer, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we should probably start getting some of the results in for the lower ticket races, and then we'll see where the big one, the DA's race, goes and the statewides.
Yeah, and as we have obviously several things to talk about tonight, but as we're prepping, the thing that's really sort of dominated our conversations and a lot of conversations is the district attorney's race between incumbent Steve Zappala, who is also running as a Republican on the Republican side of the ticket, and independent candidate Lisa Middleman, who became an independent to run against Zappala in the general election tonight. Erin, so I don't think anybody's going to say that that a Middleman win is I mean it's for it to be even possible. I mean, a lot of things have to happen.
Yeah. So this is a race on the DA's end. It's just pure probability. You have a 20-year incumbent that has 100% name recognition and voter ID across the county. He's on both sides of the ticket. So when you put it that way, the probability of somebody coming in and easily taking that away is very, very slim. I mean, you're looking at like a 99% probability that he takes that. That means that forces Lisa Middleman into a race of possibility.
Right.
And that means you have to really look and see where the possibility is that she can pull votes. The number one thing that you have to do is that name ID never goes away. So you have to do very much what Sarah Innamorato or Summer Lee did when they ran in their primaries. What they did was they took candidates in Paul Costa and Dom Costa that had 100% name ID, and they turned that name ID against them.
Right.
And you do that by hitting constantly. And you get people to walk into the poll and say, Dom Costa,
right.
Paul Costa,
yeah.
And here's an alternative. That's how that works. I don't know that the Middleman campaign was successful at that. In addition, they had to do it in 90 days.
Right.
That is an just unfathomably short period of time to run a race of 1.2 million people, which is almost 2 U.S. congressional races. So, you think about 2 races that Connor Lamb ran combined into one. You have 90 days with 0 name recognition. The goal there is to have an unbelievable fundraising program, an unbelievable media program, and just pound at the incumbent over and over and over again until his name ID is painful.
And she had half of that. She got some money.
She did.
But it's the other side of that we were talking about earlier. There really was not much of a media presence except on social media. She was out there, but there were no. I mean, if whether you like Tom Wolf as a governor or not, nobody expected Tom Wolf to be the governor of Pennsylvania when he was sitting up on a stage at CMU with 12 other candidates. Nobody thought he was going to be the governor. And a week later, he starts running these ads, and nobody could catch him after that.
And $10 million on the air right out of the gate. And that's a great example, because I think if the Middleman campaign had dropped anything, and with targeted cable these days, they could have dropped 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand in targeted areas and really got her name ID up. They chose not to go on the air at all, which is really absurd. Instead, if you look at the finance report, a lot of that money was spent on Facebook ads, social media, and field consultants. And the fact is, yes, in Sarah Innamorato's race, in Summer Lee's race, when you're dealing with 55,000 people in a state rep's race, where I think Summer's margin was 3,000, which she registered, just ran a beautiful campaign, registered those voters, and created her margin in voter registration. You can do that on the doors, but you cannot do that. In 1.2 million people, you are not going to door knock your way through that, and you're certainly not going to do it in 90 days.
Right. And you have a first-time candidate. By her own admission, she'd never done this before, and she may have thought about it. But of course, in the spring, in the primary, we had Teron Jenkins, and we'll get into that situation
Sure.
later on. But so she's a first-time candidate running in a short amount of time with an extremely young campaign staff, and
Very.
there were I've sat right here and some press releases and some things came in. There were some missteps on how they handled some issues, and those are things that that you have to learn by doing in these kinds of things. And so when you almost have to run a perfect race, I don't know that they got there, and they're facing not only their strategy is Democrats don't vote straight party ticket, and Republican but you also need the Republican side
Sure.
to not vote straight party, and there's really not a whole lot of reason for them not to vote straight party in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about the fact that in the 2017 off year, we saw far less people splitting the ticket in 15, where in 2015, you had that dynamic where Rich Fitzgerald put a lot of people in races against women.
Right.
So all these people were going in, and there was all this dynamic stuff going on. They had a reason to go in and make a statement. The question is, did the Middleman campaign create enough of an argument, create enough of a buzz to get people to go in that booth and say, you know what, I want to pick, I want to choose, I'm not going straight ticket? And I don't think that happened.
You're right, and there were it was a nice idea, not to sort of, I'm not poo-pooing it at all.
Sure.
To step up and ask for a period of time, but it really was just, and listen, we might see the impossible happen tonight, but
Absolutely.
we're not sure.
In this era, anything's possible.
Exactly. We're going to go now to political current columnist Kierran Young, who was out at the polls all day today, and he is now currently hitting several of the candidate parties on the South Side. Kierran, how was your day today out in the field?
My day was excellent. I had a great time bouncing around from different polling locations, saw a higher turnout in the suburbs than in the city, anecdotally from the polling locations that I visited. So I'm interested to see how this DA's race breaks down, and then also on the city side, how turnout breaks down in the Parks referendum ballot initiative.
You've watched this race pretty closely. What do you see? And Erin and I were talking earlier about there really doesn't seem to be a path to victory, at least one that's, there is one, but one that seems realistic for Lisa Middleman. How do you see that the race tonight?
90% of the Democratic vote, and the independents as well, I believe, for her to win substantially. I don't see that happening. I think, maybe she gets 30 or 40% of the Democratic vote. And we see a good chunk of the majority of the Democratic Party stay with Mr. Zappala like we did in the primary. And I think that's the more likely circumstance. Plus, he'll now have the Republican vote, to which I think he'll probably get 80 or 90% of their vote because of some of the prominent endorsements that he's gotten over the last couple of days.
And we're talking, of course, about the one of the most high profile was former Governor Tom Corbett stepped up for the district attorney. And also, and again, there's the whole idea of Zappala being on both sides of the ticket, and there's also the idea of, do you have to embrace the other side of the ticket? And there seems to be, at least with this endorsement, but also his son, Stevie Zappala, was at Donald Trump's visit to Pittsburgh here recently at the Shale conference. Kierran, what are you seeing some kind of shift with Zappala toward sort of Republican backers, Republican constituents?
I don't particularly think so. I think that in this election, he's in a position where he has to fight for his political life, so to speak. So he's going to talk to every voter in the county and try to ask for their vote. And this is the second time in a year that he's going through this. So I really believe he's hunkering down and trying to make sure he has both of his flanks covered. So as we go forward, I don't foresee a switch to becoming a Republican. I just don't know. I'm not that close to Mr. Zappala. I don't know if he would do something like that.
So you were also out at the polls today, and you had an interesting run-in with a gentleman who was Lisa Middleman supporter. Am I correct? And also, but he was also against the parks referendum, which is a $500,000 levy to put money toward capital projects as well as maintenance of Pittsburgh City Parks, and we're going to be talking about that a lot here this evening as well. But talk to me a little bit about that gentleman and that interaction.
Well, he's actually a neighbor at a polling location in the 10th Ward, very, very close to my home.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that there are a lot of progressives who are leery of giving taxpayer dollars to a private entity and raising taxes in order to fund something that the city should already be doing. I personally believe, and this man suggested this as well, that this could have easily been done by a mere tax increase that was proposed in Bill Peduto's budget and moved through the council, and could still be implemented under the eyes of the city. We don't actually need a nonprofit trust in order to do this, and I think that's the sentiment that Al expressed to me when we were standing at the polling location.
Erin, how good a job do you think that a lot of money was spent?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was asking Erin. A lot of money was spent on this parks referendum, close to $700,000 from the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. How good a job do you think they did at actually explaining? Because that's something Kierran was running into today. People, didn't want to see this money, going into private hands or into nonprofit hands. But at least the side of the Parks Conservancy all along has been, well, the city's still going to have control over that. So obviously somewhere there was a messaging issue despite spending $700K.
Sure. I always look at it from the perspective of the average, regular run-of-the-mill soccer mom. That's how I look at things. And I think the problem is you're going to hear a lot of people say, well, I love parks. Everybody loves parks. Parks are great. And you look at it on the ballot and you vote for it because it just sounds like a really good feel-good thing. Right. And we saw that with Marcy's Law too. And that's my concern. When you drop $660,000 into an effort and you're marketing it, it becomes very difficult to overcome with simple social media and grassroots messaging to explain what you're working with.
Kierran, what are your thoughts on exactly how the messaging was? What did you see as far as, do you think people today had an understanding of exactly how those dollars would be spent?
No,
and who would be in control rather too?
I don't really, and I don't think a lot of people believe that they would stick to their plan. I mean, I got a lot of pieces of mail. I think I'm counting 7, 8 of them. And just tons of mail that plays up the fact that we need better parks in every neighborhood, safe places for children to play, maintenance, rehabilitation, repairs. I mean, how could you be against any of this stuff, right? And it just makes it sound like such a sweet deal. And some of the people look at the way the ballot language was written, and they wonder, are they trying to pull this one off?
Right. Kierran, Kierran is going to be out at some candidate parties tonight, and so we're going to hear from him later on in the show. Kierran, thanks for checking in. We'll talk to you in a little while.
No problem. Have a good one.
All right. Erin, just to kind of go off on the parks a little bit more, there was the library referendum in 2011, I think, and that was something that was passed, and certainly it had its detractors, but then there was also the children's fund last year, and the library referendum won. It was passed. Then we had the children's fund last year, which I think a lot of people were just confused over what was happening with that. And then this year we have the Parks Conservancy up on the ballot. So do you think we're going to see more of these kinds of things? I mean, this is not 2 in a row where voters have kind of said, we're not crazy about putting our money, even on some level, in the hands of a.
Well, one of the differentiations you can make between the children's fund and this was a countywide.
Right.
That wasn't
Sure.
just the city. So that made a big difference. You're going into a county where 300,000 people live in the city, but 1.1 million live in the surrounding areas, which most people view as suburbs. Those people are not going to be as inclined to vote for something like this, where in the city, what we've seen, as you said with the library, the city is more inclined to put money into those causes.
Right.
But outside the city, you're not going to see as much support for those things. So that was the big thing. One of the things that I think that really killed the Children's Fund and that work. And you're right, the messaging on that was a disaster.
Right.
I mean, by the time it was done, it was a slush fund. And you saw the activist community and the social media just blowing that up all over the place. So this is taking us back into just a city referendum, and history's shown that a lot of times these things pass, so it's likely that it does pass. But I think that what we are seeing is, first of all, you have a problem with government by foundation.
Yeah.
And just general privatization, which is always an issue. When you want to take power away from the voters, power away from the legislative process. We're seeing this in Marcy's Law. We have something on the ballot that the voter votes on, but there's no process of legislators evaluating it, of hearings, of a true discussion. Right. And the question is, why are we bypassing the legislative process constantly? Now, in a constitutional amendment, that's the way you do it. But we could have done that legislatively. That was the choice. So the question is, why are we constantly do that? And I think what the voters have to be wary of is anytime you're doing this, you have a lot of money going into a campaign, and why?
Right.
Why are you buying your way onto a ballot as opposed to going through the legislative process of civil discourse and debate and allowing it to play out? Probably because you think it should lose.
Right.
That's the question, is why not go through that process and allow the process to decide, no, we're just going to dump it on the voters, drop a lot of money on the air and promote it and put out some snazzy messaging that's maybe not true, and not allow the process to vet it properly.
You are listening to the Pittsburgh Current live on election night with Charlie Deitch and Erin McClelland, live from beautiful Beachview Business District. Bethany, you're going to have to just say that. I can't. Oh, yes, you can.
Was that English?
And you can ask questions by texting me also, Bethany. You can ask questions on Facebook. Put it in the comments, and they'll get them over to Erin and I. And we've got a lot of guests calling in tonight, so we're going to have a lot of different opinions on a lot of different things. One thing I want to talk to you about, Erin, we talked a little before we came on. So the Marcy's Law, also known as the Victims' Rights constitutional amendment, it's a national initiative that they're taking to to state level. The League of Women Voters and the ACLU filed a lawsuit. A judge, was it last week or the week before, said that you can vote on this today, but we're not going to count the votes. And then today, the Supreme Court ruled we're not going to count the votes. So there's still an appeal process there. But Talk a little bit about Marcy's Law. We were talking a little bit about this earlier. Talk a little bit about what you saw as the issues with it.
Well, I think the fundamental argument that I've been making to people when I've been trying to convince them that this is not a good thing and you shouldn't vote for it is the Constitution is not there to protect us from each other. It is there to protect the people from the state. It is rights that define due process, that define what liberty is. It is the heart and soul of the breath that is our liberty in this country and allows us our freedoms. And when you start building laws in there into our Constitution that are designed to change due process, take due process away, and burden it, that is not what we should be doing. So I tell every voter, be very, very leery of any constitutional amendment that is redefining anything else other than how we are protected from the state. That is the sole reason that we have a Constitution. So, you have a billionaire who unfortunately lost a loved one, but has decided that he's going to go around this country and basically buy his way onto our Constitution. And I just have a very serious problem with that. My Constitution is not for sale. Our Constitution belongs to the people, and we shouldn't put it on the slab to the highest bidder. And I really feel that when all of our legislature voted to put this on the ballot as a referendum, they really sold us out. They didn't put it through due process. They didn't, really allow it to be vetted. And I think everybody should say, no, you don't touch my Constitution. And if we're going to do that, then let's have a serious conversation about why we need to amend our Constitution. And yes, the Superior Court created an injunction saying it was unconstitutional because, again, we have a code, a criminal code for protections of victims' rights. If we want to advance that and modify it for our current climate, that's great. We can do that. It should be done in the legislature. It should not be done on our Constitution. And you see a lot of states that are going through the process of having to unscramble this egg now. You put this on your Constitution. Now you got to go back and repeal it, get rid of it,
right.
Fix it. And it is creating a real logistical mess. It's also backing up the courts. I mean, think about this for a second. When you have somebody that robs a bank and they're being prosecuted, according to this bill, you have to notify the bank through every step of the process. If you can't find the person or you don't know who to notify in the bank because you don't know who the actual victim is, it slows the process down, and it literally starts cutting into U.S. Constitution rights for, speedy trial, things like that. And it's creating bottlenecks in our system. It's adding unbelievable expense. And there's the issue with the election law is how these things affect Allegheny County, where you have a large DA's office and you have a lot of people working there. You start getting into rural counties where they have much smaller district attorney's offices, much smaller administration going on in their local government. Things like this become a real serious burden, and it reinforces the disconnect between the metropolitan and the rural parts of the state.
And I think that it's a lot of times with, you'd like to think that people are going out and doing their due diligence. But for some people, the first thing they read about Marsy's Law were 75 words today on a ballot.
Yep.
It's the victims, for victims' rights amendment. You're like, oh, hell, of course I'm for that. Of course I'm for victims' rights. Exactly. And so, and I think that's again, that's part of the issue. And again, I think as you said earlier, just a minute ago too, when you have a single special interest trying to make a change to your Constitution, and that person isn't the president of the United States, we really have to stand up and take notice.
Yeah. Yeah, we hold our Constitution sacred, whether it be the United States Constitution, and it's made to be amendable, but it should not be done hastily. And that's the concern here. And I just that was the argument I wanted to make to everybody. Do you not cherish this thing and the values in it to the extent that you are willing to just walk in and, based on those words on that ballot, shift the values in it? And again, what's the argument somebody made was the state has a right to protect victims. So now if you're victimized by a crime, you have a right to sue the state because they didn't properly execute your constitutional right to protection. That's absurd. Could you imagine what our legal system and our court system would look like every time somebody is wronged if they could sue the state for not fulfilling that? Right. I mean, you're opening up a can of worms that is very, very dangerous. And as we know, the other states saw that, and now they're trying to repeal it, and they're going through this mess. And it's a really hard egg to unscramble. And I really hope that Pennsylvania demonstrates that they're the first state to go through this process and not be victimized by an outlandish billionaire who is completely trying to buy his way into the hearts and minds of people for some ulterior motive that I can't truly explain. And he's not really a great character when you look into him. I hope that we're the ones that said, no, we're not doing this. We're going to be smarter. We're going to be more thoughtful, and we value our Constitution, and you don't just come in here and buy your way onto it.
I agree. Yes.
That's my sub-speech for tonight.
We're still waiting on the first results to come in. For the moment, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be back in just a few minutes. You are watching Election Night Live with the Pittsburgh Current, Charlie Deitch, Erin McClelland. We're going to be with you here until this thing's over one way or another.
Absolutely.
We'll see you in a few minutes. Welcome back to Pittsburgh Current Election Night Live with Charlie Deitch, Erin McClelland. We're here watching his results eventually start coming in. We were talking a little bit about the district attorney's race in Allegheny County, but that's not the only race, countywide race that's going off tonight.
No, we have an election for our county controller, Chelsea Wagner, who did have a Republican opponent on the ballot against her in this election. So welcoming in Chelsea Wagner. Hey, controller, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, Erin, Charlie. I'm great, thank you. How are both of you doing?
Great. Thanks for joining us. So can you talk to us a little bit? You had an opponent this time around, Republican on the ballot against you. Can you talk a little bit about that campaign?
Sure. I mean, as always, we try to run a campaign based on the issues. And having served in this position now for 2 terms, I was really running on my record. And it's a record that I'm certainly proud of in standing for independence. I said the first time that I ran, I said I wanted to be more than just a bean counter. And that was our campaign theme 8 years ago. And it was the idea that we were going to not only maintain the highest standards within the office, which we have, we're one of only 4 auditing departments that's peer reviewed, which is the highest standard, and I'm very proud of that. But we also wanted to make sure that we were elevating the position and getting involved in some things that others don't see as traditionally roles of the controller, such as the access for our hospitals with the PMC, or even when you look at the quality of our drinking water. So I'm certainly very honored to have been voted in to serve these last 8 years. Before that, I was, of course, a state representative, honored in that capacity as well. And I humbly asked voters to reelect me based on my record.
Wonderful. Hey, you weighed in on the Parks Initiative, and you actually did an op-ed. Could you talk a little bit about your perspective on that referendum?
Right. Well, I said this not only as county controller, and from that one side, I certainly have a very clear understanding of the financials of government locally. But I also looked at it as a city resident, as someone who has chosen to live in the city, as a wife and parent of 2 young children. And quite frankly, as all of us know, it is more costly to live in the city. And I've seen many of our friends who have wanted to live in the city make the decision that they've had to make with their pocketbook and be pushed out to the suburbs. And I don't think that's the way that we rebuild the city. I firmly believe that our city has to be affordable for everyone. And it's a big problem that we already have. So if we're looking at bettering our parks, which is certainly a laudable kind of idea, but what good is that if people can't even afford to live and be close to them? So I also had issues with what I refer to as ballot box accountability being taken away. So the idea that this is a significant tax that was going to an unelected body. But also, I don't think that the city actually looked into and did real due diligence, particularly the mayor, into how this could be funded if it is, in fact, his priority. So I'm a big believer that budgets are priorities. And I also suggested in that op-ed that if we are talking about this idea that we are cooperating with our governments as we should be, then why aren't we looking at the sources that fund the county parks for also the city parks, and specifically some of the funding from the hotel tax? Because, people stay in our region, and when all of our residents go to parks, nobody is really checking whether it's a city of Pittsburgh park or it's a county park. They're just appreciating the parks that we have here. So I think there are many ways to prioritize that. And just putting a heavy burden on taxpayers who are already overwhelmingly burdened in the city is not the right way to go.
Chelsea, you're someone who reads this stuff not just with a resident's eye, but also as a controller. What do you think of the messaging that was out there? Do you think it was really made clear exactly? Now, Mayor Bill Peduto, several members of City Council obviously came out against this. Mayor Bill Peduto supported this measure. Is there what is your take on how exactly? Do you think it was clearly Do you think it was clearly explained exactly who was going to control this fund, and kind of how the monies would be spent?
I think that when you have kind of wordier ballot questions like this, that even if, and I think perhaps there may have been some effort, I'd actually say that I think this ballot question was better than many others that I've seen on today's ballot. By comparison, I thought that Marcy's Law, that wording was far more deceiving than was the part. But I think it really becomes a problem in and of itself, because when we're going to these referenda questions to begin with, you're already having power really on just one side to draft that question in the light most favorable to themselves. And, people, I think, often aren't aware that an issue like that really hasn't gone through a deliberative process within government. And I think some people innocently and understandably assume that a ballot question appears as a last resort. And I will tell you, as somebody who was very, very active, in fact, in the library tax, and I think there are a lot of differences there, which I'm happy to go into if you want to talk about that. But my impression is that there are a lot of organizations here in Pittsburgh, and I know it because some have admitted it openly, that scratched their heads after that initiative was passed and thought, wow, this is how we get money. But they missed the whole point that was driven 100% by residents. It really came from grassroots, starting with protests of the library board members and the leadership. So I think in thinking that way, that these heavily funded groups can just put questions on the ballot and spend a lot of money and package them very, very nicely, that's their way to get money, because they're missing the other really important part of the equation, which is really, I think, the needs question. And they're, putting the cart before the horse, which was done here. They decided they were going to do this, and then they went on a listening tour. And I'm troubled by that.
Chelsea, we have a question from Twitter, and it's not exactly related to tonight, but on Twitter, someone asked, what's your take on Peduto's comments about the petrochemical industry and that he made recently, and sort of his, talking about those jobs not necessarily being welcome.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think there's rhetoric and not action, like in many things. Right. I would criticize him on. I actually have spoken to some people, particularly people in labor, about those comments. And what is most troubling to me, and an issue that I've worked on very much, is taking that and comparing it to what I would say in many ways is one of the biggest environmental problems we have presently within the city, that's threatening every single resident, and particularly children, is lead in the water.
Right. So
we have a mayor that stands up and waves this environmental flag, but then when it comes to action, it's not there. And so to me, if that is truly what he stands for, then he should be involved with the county executive on those kinds of matters, with the health department, or what have you. So I just don't find that rhetoric to be genuine from him, based on actions.
Great. Chelsea, thank you very much, and we're going to watch the results come in. Thank you for taking the time with us this evening.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great night.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Erin. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we're still waiting on some results. Are starting to trickle in from the county. Nothing on a lot. I mean, there are. We talk about it when you looked at your own ballot perhaps today, you thought, oh, there's not a whole lot on here. But when you think about municipalities all over the county are voting for councilors today, and perhaps their own sort of ballot questions, there's certainly a lot out there that will be coming in. And as soon as we get some results, we'll be passing them on here. Erin, I wanted to ask you about going back to the DA's race. a lot of the knock on Steve Zappala has been changes in the criminal justice system, true criminal justice reform. I've heard them. I mean, when I interviewed him this past spring, he, I think he would tout himself somewhat as a reformer. How does that play against what the general public sees? Because also in that same interview, when I asked him about, and this was right after the Michael Rosefeld verdict, and I asked Steve, does he hear what people, the complaints people have? Does he, is he hearing people? And he told me that he just really didn't hear a lot of that, out in his, and some people have, of course, made the comment that you won't necessarily hear that out in public if you're out in public in Fox Chapel and not necessarily in the city. But talk a little bit about that idea of criminal justice reform, what we need, and sort of where we've been under the Zappala umbrella.
Well, sure. I mean, there's no doubt that early in his career, Steve really started diving into things like cash bail and started looking at truly solving problems. Before there was an appetite for criminal justice reform, before it was a thing, he was starting to address some of those things. I think that the fundamental difference is there's two things. There's a geographical difference in what criminal justice looks like and what people want it to look like, from the 300,000 people that live in the city and the 1.1 million that live in the suburbs. So when you come into the valleys and the suburbs and you start talking about police shootings, what we hear is suspects shooting police. Where I live, we don't have a problem with cops shooting suspects ever. What we do have a problem with is losing a police officer in the line of duty about every 6 months. Right. So when you say the word police shooting, that's what they hear. So in Steve's defense, he has to navigate the perspective in the city where there's one problem and a very different dynamic where we expect him to protect our law enforcement in those areas. Because, by the way, where I live, we're policed by our friends and our high school classmates and our neighbors and people, we know them all. So it's a completely different experience of law enforcement. Second of all, the idea of criminal justice reform also reflects a very different, very hyper-political perspective of what a district attorney is. The district attorney idea that Steve ran on and maintains is very, very different than the Larry Krasner model. That is much more political, much more aggressive, much more opinionated. Steve looks at it as, I am here to enforce the law and represent the victims and the constituents of my area. Where when you look at the criminal justice reform movement under Larry Krasner and the more progressive DA, they are looking at this as a very political, very aggressive, very opinionated office. And I think that in Allegheny County, there is no doubt that the criminal justice reform movement has not created an appetite for that outside of the city. Now, I will say one person began to change that, and that was Bethany Hallam. Right. Bethany Hallam, I mean, she was the rock star this year. There's no doubt about it. She ran on a solid, aggressive, uncompromising, unequivocal criminal justice reform platform, and she was able to get, regular run-of-the-mill white people in places like the Valley to grab onto that and say, okay, like that makes sense. She was able to talk about it in a way that resonated with them. And that's going to be where we have to go in the future if you want that to grab in Allegheny County.
And we do, and we're going to, again, all things we're going to talk about later. Erin did work as a political strategist for Steve Zappala in the spring. In the primary, In the primary, not since then. And we're going to talk a little bit about with Erin about that experience. And I do want to say that there are some results starting to come in. And again, these are very, very, very early when you start hearing the numbers. But with 58 out of 1,322 precincts reporting, Steve Zappala is just over Lisa Middleman, about 51% to 49%. And again, it's so early at this point that, we are, you can't really tell much from that. Erin, I mean, we'll look at where those votes are coming in from, and we'll have some thoughts on that here in a few minutes. But on the phone, not on the phone, so then I can ask.
Not on the phone.
So then I can. And also, again, these are all very, very light turnout or light numbers. Chelsea Wagner is up over Republican Brooke Naddenley, Rich Fitzgerald, and we will be talking about the county executive race a little bit later. Allegheny County Executive Rich Fitzgerald squaring off with former County Council person Matt Droz. And at this point, again, very, very early, Rich has a pretty substantial lead already up on Matt Droz. We are going to be going here in a moment to Allegheny County Treasurer John Weinstein, who is running unopposed this evening. But before we do, one thing I did want to ask you just on the DA question. You had said something to me earlier that I thought was very interesting, and we'll get into more about the Kierran Jenkins primary campaign here in a moment.
Yeah.
But you said if Lisa Middleman was the candidate in the spring, what did you say about that?
Yeah, that's a tough race for just running against a woman in a Democratic primary in Allegheny County. Is a very difficult climb for anybody. Yeah. Now, I mean, you're up against a 20-year incumbent, but that would have been a whole different race.
And what are the main sort of points there that you saw, just real quick before we go to the phones? What were some of the main points that you saw there that that she could have, some inroads she could have made on Stephen in the?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing is, Kierran Jenkins got 41% of the vote. Correct. In that. And one of the things that really stifled him was a stance that he took early on the LGBTQ community. You take that out of the mix and you get, he announced with a lot of momentum behind him, and then that sort of blew the wind out of the sails. You announce with a candidate that doesn't create that problem, and you are going to get a lot more momentum. You have an aggressive electorate. You have an entire race based on Democrats, and where the progressives have a very high concentration, where women are winning primaries, just right. Hand over fist. And it makes it a much more difficult dynamic. So if she's in that primary, my job gets a whole lot harder.
Hey, we were in a moment where, that's why when Kierran Jenkins made his announcement that he was going to run, we were on the heels of the Rosefeld verdict. Antoine Rose, hadn't been a year since Antoine Rose had been killed. So you're right. I think that it could have been a completely different race, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Sure. But I want to go to the phones. We have Allegheny County Treasurer John Weinstein is with us. Sir, how are you this evening?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Doing well. You're here with Charlie Deitch and Erin McClelland. We're spending the election night together, talking to politics and watching the results come in. How'd you spend your election day today, sir?
Well, I've been at the polls since 6:30 this morning in Kennedy Township, where I live, and I just enjoy the opportunity to see so many people come to vote. And I had to step away for a little while. We had a death in the family. I had to go to a funeral, mass, and then I came back to the polls. So I've been here ever since. And it was a interesting day because there's just so much going on. And when you see the dynamic of different people coming up to vote, you really get a sense of how people are taking a look at this in anticipation of next year's election.
Right.
I spent a lot of time talking to voters, and a lot of them brought up the presidential election, and were asking opinions about what you thought about some of the candidates and the different things that were going on. So it was really, really interesting. But I've been standing at the polls for a long time. I'm fortunate this evening. I was reelected. Obviously, I have no opponent. I was on the Democrat and the Republican ballot for my sixth consecutive term, serving the great citizens of this county. And I enjoy the opportunity so much to be able to work with all of these people all throughout Allegheny County. I was the only countywide elected official that was unopposed in this election today, other than Bethany Hallam, obviously, right. For county council at large.
And obviously, like you said, you didn't have an opponent today. Why is it still important for you, though, to get out to the polls, to talk to the voters, even when your situation was already taken care of.
Well, it wasn't just that. I actually spent, I was out campaigning, even though
Right.
I had no opponent. That's just how I am. I am always in touch with the voters, and I enjoy the opportunity to meet people from all over this county, whether it's in Pitcairn or Cheswick. If there are events going on, I'm there, and I just want to go out and meet as many people as I possibly can, even without it. If people would say to me constantly, "You don't have an opponent. Why are you out campaigning?" Because that's just how I am. I think that the electorate needs to hear from and see the elected officials that they support. And I'm very humbly honored at the fact that this is my 6th consecutive term working with the people in Allegheny County and servicing the taxpayers. And they really need to see and hear from their elected officials, not just at election time.
Treasurer, this is Erin McClelland. Thanks for joining us this evening. I wanted to ask you, now that you have another term, what can you tell the voters of Allegheny County? What can they expect from your office? I mean, obviously, they associate with you with paying their taxes, but what are you doing in that office that's unique or exciting to actually make that process more efficient or more effective or easier or, slightly less painful for them?
Well, I appreciate that, Erin, and it's always nice to hear from you and talk with you. We are going to make history in Allegheny County because we're going to consolidate some collection services, tax collection services. Let's take the city of Pittsburgh as an example. The city residents get multiple tax bills. They get one for the city, the school, and the city of Pittsburgh together. They get a county tax bill. We're going to combine that service through an intergovernmental cooperation agreement where city residents would get one tax bill. They would pay it in installments, but it would cover their county tax, their city tax, their school tax, and the library tax, all on one statement, just like a credit card bill. If you use your MasterCard at 15 different locations during the month, you get one bill. So why can't we get one tax bill and people just pay it in installments? They're paying it anyway. It's so much more efficient. Just the internal efficiencies that we will gain on the printing and the postage and the envelopes, all of that stuff. And it's true intergovernmental cooperation, and no one has ever done anything like this in the history of Allegheny County or the city of Pittsburgh. And if I can collect taxes for the city of Pittsburgh, I could do it for every municipality and every school district in this county, and we could make tax collection so much more efficient. And it's seamless to the taxpayer. They don't really care who they pay. They just want to pay. They shouldn't have to pay multiple entities to collect their taxes. We're the only county, we were the first county in Pennsylvania to go green, where we email people their tax bills and they could pay online. It's free with an e-check, and we email you back your tax receipt. You could print it out yourself. So that is something I'm really excited about because it's going to change the dynamic of intergovernmental cooperation between government entities collecting taxes. I think it's really an exciting opportunity for us in the very, very near future.
That's great. And it's so nice that you're incorporating green concepts in because that's going to be really important to start marketing some of the stuff we're doing to millennials and grabbing them and bringing them into this party. So it's wonderful. Now we know why you get a 6th term and got it unopposed. It's incredible work that you're doing. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Treasurer. And we look forward to seeing you again throughout the next 4 years and all the exciting things you're going to be doing.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to working with you guys and listening to you throughout the course of the evening. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That was Allegheny County Treasurer John Weinstein. And again, Erin, as somebody who's you've run for office, you've been around this world. I mean, we talk about the fact that Steven Zappala has been around a long time. And then you have, but there have been obviously people, but then you have someone like John Weinstein who's been around this 6th term. Really is sort of, seems to be someone in it for what he can do to serve and not necessarily, and again, not casting in dispersion or anyone else,
Sure.
But he just seems like the type of guy who is really in this for the right reasons.
Yeah. What's really fascinating about John, and he's somewhat of a soft-spoken, humble man, and he's in this for service. And very recently, he was given an award through a project that he works with, a nonprofit that gives technological support to special needs kids. And, you know, I got to be in that room for that. And what you see is not just a life of service in government, but a life of service to his community. And it is very understated. It's not something that makes it in the press every day or that people are always talking about or lights up a Twitter feed. But I think that persona is sort of the distinguished gentleman, the consummate statesman that people want to see and hope to see in an elected official. So I don't think that gets pointed out about John enough. Because like I said, he's so understated, but you know, he just does a good job. He goes around, he's always campaigning, always shows up. He's always working with new candidates and trying to incorporate newer ideas with the base party platforms. So I think that's why he's been so successful and why he continues to succeed and why he continues to win and run unopposed.
Right. I always hate to ask this when someone just wins a new term or wins an office. But from your knowledge of being around, do you see John Weinstein taking a step to higher office at some point?
I would be very disappointed. I don't know what he's going to do, but I would be very disappointed if he doesn't. He's a real political mind, so he's always great on how he looks at other races, especially the ones that he supports. He's very aggressive in the candidates that he supports. So I would be very disappointed if he doesn't have something extraordinary in his future. I don't know what, but I would be very surprised if he didn't at some point. Like I said, I would just be disappointed. But then again, he's doing great where he is. He seems to be so happy. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he just hangs out where he is and says, "This is wonderful, and I'm doing a great job, and I get to do all kinds of neat things and really dive into that office." So who knows? But I think he'd be a great statewide candidate for a larger office.
And we do have some more results coming in, and we do have a scroll at the bottom of the screen. You can check that out as results come in. I am still looking, and again, I like to think that I'm technologically savvy, but I'm having trouble finding the Parks Initiative for anyone over there in the dark who might happen to find those numbers for me. But we do have some numbers coming in from City of Pittsburgh races, and we do have the odd number district council seats up, and there are a couple of contested races there. One is District 9. Councilman Ricky Burgess, Reverend Ricky Burgess, and we do want to say, just for full disclosure, of course, Kierran Young was an opponent of Reverend Burgess in the spring. Just want to say that up front. We do have some numbers coming in there. Right now, District 1 on the north side, and we are going to have Bobby Wilson, who defeated Darlene Harris in the spring. We're going to have him coming up here in a little while. He's right now, he's in a race that, again, this is 6 precincts, reporting 6 of 39 precincts for this seat. And Bobby Wilson is ahead with 53% of the votes, above Chris Rosselot's 43%. And then from there, we have Reverend Ricky Burgess is currently leading a 4-person field. B. Denise Welch is second, coming in with about 29% of the vote, behind Burgess's 42.5%. So we're going to keep you up to date on those things. This is one of those things, Erin, where a lot of people aren't usually checking city council results in the fall, because of course, a lot of these things are usually settled, in the spring, with the Democratic primary. But we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that, we are seeing more independents, and the idea of an independent candidate, at least, has, for me, from what I've noticed, has changed than what we used to have. And again, I probably get, letters or whatever, but we all know when we think of independent candidates, especially like in the past 10 or 15 years, when we think about the mayor's race, for example, and there was Les Ludwig was always there to run against whoever was running for mayor. But we're now seeing candidates stepping up who can't be immediately discounted. Do you think that this is sort of a sign for like a sign of the future? I mean, can independents make, not just here, but in any sort of race, can an independent candidate make headway as a legitimate contender?
I think so, and especially the smaller the race, the more impact an independent candidate can have, especially in the era where social media is available, where used to be the only media you had was television or radio. Now you have this free source that can just go viral very quickly. You have the activist community deciding that the traditional party structure isn't meeting their needs. They're finding some freedom outside of that. So with more information comes more opportunity. And like I said, social media is going to be big for a lot of these down ticket races. Now, obviously, you look at the party structure has used social media on a national scale, first with Barack Obama. And we're seeing that, but really where it's making a difference is these down ticket races and their ability to fundraise, which was never an opportunity before. Now they have an opportunity to get a message out, do fundraising. There's PACs that are supporting that. There's side groups that are really looking for and putting a significant amount of money into some of these races. If you look at Lisa Middleman's race, technically she outraised Zappala through this period. He started out with $20,000 in cash, and then they raised a similar amount. He used $15,000 from his AG PAC. She did not. And then in the past week, she raised $92,000. Now, some of that is big donors, but if you look at the bulk of her finance report, it was small dollar donors. You look at Summer Lee and Sarah Morato's finance report, you had a lot of women that were never traditional donors giving $100, and they were able to raise $100,000 out of that. Those are opportunities that are enhanced by social media and the opportunities that are out there now that are alternative to traditional media outlets. And as that grows and as those institutions get more powerful, you're going to see higher ticket races start to do better as third party. It's going to take some time, and it's going to take some infrastructure building. And we know that the DSAs had their struggles in Allegheny County. You had a lot of people, they had those two big wins that they supported, and then it got a little dysfunctional for a little bit, and that didn't help Lisa Middleman very much.
Right.
So as they go through their growing pains, and they're going to go through ebb and flows where they figure it out, it's not going to be until they get some real leadership and get some people that understand what they're doing in there that they're going to really be able to prosper with a larger race like a district attorney's race.
Right. Just sort of a side note, I think that as you said, I mean, we really saw social media in 2008 take over, and then I think we saw the end times take over when Republicans realized social media, here's a Twitter, and then it was kind of Katie bar and we really have been in a different place. Now we have a president, obviously, who that's his main source of talking to people is on Twitter, and so it's really has social media really has changed the political conversation.
And what's interesting about that is in some of my work after the 2016 race, I found a memorandum written by a colonel in the U.S. Air Force. And it was written in 1995, so 25 years before the 2020 election. And it was entitled Information Warfare and Preparing for 2020. And it was eerily prophetic of what was going to happen. When Obama used social media, he used it positively. He used it for grassroots organizing. When Trump used that infrastructure, he used it as information warfare. They were collecting 5,000 data points on different people based on what you were posting, the language you used, the sentence structure you used, the things that you were reposting, the news articles that you clicked on. They collected so much data, and 5,000 data points is astronomical. And they figured out exactly who the persuadable voters were, and they targeted them. And they targeted them with a very dark message that was designed to split and divide and conquer from within. So that's something that I think that the Democratic Party has not figured out how to combat. And that's clear because they're still calling people stupid and deplorable. Right. And, that's not helping.
Yes, if anyone, as people know me, know that I am all for discourse that really touches the heart and not necessarily, that's a lie. I like to eye gouge a little from my days of being a professional wrestling fan.
That's a little fake news there, Charlie.
Yeah. Oh, no, I like to punch below the belt.
There you go. Don't we all?
Every so often. We are getting some results in, and this is the last thing that I saw here on the Parks referendum, is it is currently winning, but I believe it's tightened up 68% of the vote at this time, but I think it's tightened up somewhat, if not significantly. And we will get that to you in 1 second. Let's talk about, while we wait for our next caller, let's talk a little bit more about the situation with the DA's race. Let's talk about. So you of course, working with Steven Zappala in the spring, you had Kierran Jenkins as your opponent.
Yep.
When that first kind of broke, and then we'll transition into the Lisa Middleman situation. When that first broke and he had his announcement and there were all these officials and folks behind him, what was the reaction at the campaign, whatever you can say there about that at that time?
Yeah, after I have to say that when we realized that this was going to be a thing, actually it was when Sarah Namarato had a kickoff in November before her primary, and I think they had 350 people that nobody knew. These weren't committee people, these weren't inside baseball, these were just regular voters, and that was a cause for alarm for a lot of us. And I think that those alarms were not heeded,
right,
obviously.
Right.
So after both the Costas lost, and they lost badly, the next thing became, all right, the DA is going to be next, so let's have that conversation. And immediately, there was a campaign put together, and you really started working on what the strategy was going to be. But the announcement that he had was not in any way, shape, or form unexpected. It's exactly what we thought was going to happen. What we didn't expect to happen is what happened a week later when there were some issues on LGBTQ stance. Though, if you look, anytime that you're working with a black candidate, those issues, we saw that with Barack Obama. Sure. There's a cultural difference there sometimes. So, and as somebody who has campaigned in Johnstown and Aliquippa, I've seen that sort of discrepancy in the party.
Yeah.
So it's one that I was prepared for. I wasn't sure how that would turn out, and then it really came to fruition a lot faster than we thought. And I really did. I'd expected him to recover.
Yeah.
I really did. I was preparing for him to recover much better than he did. There were a lot of new, young, inexperienced people around him that didn't really, I think,
right,
know how quite to handle that hit and that dynamic. And, he kind of got left behind on that.
Yeah, I remember I covered that race, and when I talked to Kierran closer to the election, and I will say, when I sat down with him, I can only say that I sat down with someone who had done a lot of introspection and a lot of thinking and had done a lot of, learning and talking to people. But at that point, we're 2 or 3 weeks out from the election, and it's, and he had some folks from the LGBTQ community. Some were, still were not at all swayed
Sure.
by his, but some folks were saying, okay, if this seems righteous, this seems legitimate, in which case, yes, for Steve Zappala, I will vote for you.
Sure.
But then, but I think it was too late, and there was a lot of talk. There were calls for Kierran to step down, and that's, I think, where we started talking about,
yeah,
if that had happened and Lisa had stepped in, it might have been a completely different thing.
Oh, absolutely. If they get Kierran to step out of that race, and you put Lisa Middleman in there, who is a woman, and women are doing really, really well in primaries, not just in Allegheny County, but everywhere, and then doesn't have an LGBTQ issue going in on stance on that, then it becomes a very, very dynamic and a very difficult race.
Right.
It really does. And one that a funding advantage for an incumbent doesn't matter near as much as it does in a general.
Right. We're going back to the phones. Kierran Young is back on the line with us. Kierran, where are you now, and are you still sober, or what's going on down there on the south side?
So I am still sober because I'm driving myself. But I'm looking at different responses from, committee people that I'm friends with on social media.
Yeah.
And one committee person posted the results from the wards that were at their polling location, and it looks like Miss Middleman is doing a lot better in the city than one may have projected. If that trend holds, specifically from what I'm looking at for Northside Ward, she's going to come out of the city, and it will come down to the suburbs.
And we talked about this earlier, Kierran, and you and I talked about this earlier today. We talked about Pine Township, which was Tehran won.
Yeah, Tehran won. It was 1 or 2 precincts in Pine Township, and that was one of the things in the primary that really grabbed my attention. Now, I think in the general, you're going to have, that's a very Republican area, so
Sure.
if the Republicans go for Steve and they don't split the ticket, then, that's going to overcome that. But that grabbed me, I remember.
Kierran, is that kind of where you were coming off of the idea that places like Pine Township, those were going to be the important telltales?
Yes, and those people vote, but also it looks like Marcy's Law is, doing well in the county, which may also bode well for Steve Zappala. If something like Marcy's Law is actually carrying, then you're gonna be looking at some of those same voters are going to be likely to vote for him.
And explain your thoughts behind that, just because it's sort of a law and order kind of.
Well, and he's endorsed it.
Sure.
And him and a lot of the other statewide elected officials, John Fetterman, Governor Wolf, Connor Lamb, Senator Casey, Pat Toomey, they've all endorsed Marcy's Law. So it'll be interesting to see if this comes down to a close race. I'm looking at right now with 288 precincts reporting in the county. Marcy's Law is at 27,000 votes. Those are more than likely a lot of Steve Zappala voters. So if that continues to hold, that may be a good indicator. Actually, Mr. Zappala is at 22,000 right now. So in all likelihood, most of his vote could be coming from the same people who are voting yes on Marcy's Law. And in some cases, people who are voting yes on Marcy's Law and then voting for Lisa Middleman, which is kind of interesting to me.
And where are you, Kierran? Who have you been? What have you been seeing? Have you been to any particular parties yet? Or any moods or folks you've talked to that worth reporting or talking about?
So I'm currently at Bethany Hallam's party, and I plan to head to. I think Mr. Fitzgerald's having a party, and I know Steve Zappala's having a party, and Lisa Middleman's having a party. So I'm waiting to see which way the winds blow on that particular race to see where I'm going to go next. But it could be a much longer night, and some of these campaigns could be sending people home without actually knowing, how this is going to end.
Do either of you, Erin or Kierran, do either of you have any thoughts about whether Steve Zappala thinks that he could lose tonight?
I would personally, I would think he would have to. I think every incumbent at this particular point, especially in the Democratic Party, is scared for their lives. It's quite clear that the Democratic voters want change, and right now, change candidates are doing well. They might not always be winning, but they're doing very well, and in a lot of cases, overperforming.
Sorry. Folks, this is a high-tech, low-tech, high-tech type situation we got going on here. I got phones. I have 19 ways of communicating, and I'm not sure what the answer to my question is. Do we need to take a break, or do we have Beth? All righty. Kierran, we've got Bethany Hallam calling in a couple of minutes. We will hear from you here in a little bit, and definitely anything you're seeing from your contacts out in the committee, folks, and anybody who's got some insight on this, let us know.
I will.
I'll
talk to you later.
Thank you. That is Pittsburgh current political columnist Kierran Young. He is out and about this evening. Just because I haven't formed a question yet, Erin, but generally what Kierran talked about the results sort of coming in. Lisa is performing well in the city. What do you?
That's
see
expected.
About that?
That's absolutely expected. That's a highly Democratic area. You look at those areas in the primary. Tehran performed amazingly well there with no money, with no real aggressive campaign. Right. And that's really why he got 41%. It was the city, it was in the suburbs that he did not do well. So it doesn't surprise me at all that somebody that raised $300,000 is doing, in a very high information electorate, is doing extremely well there. The question remains, and we always knew this, is what does turnout look like in the suburbs, because
Right.
it's naturally lower than the city. It was a rainy day. Do the older people stay home, or do they come out and vote? And if they come out, how many of them vote for Lisa?
And I'm looking here just really quickly at the map, and it looks, when you get outside the city, it looks like, it's definitely Steve
It's
Zappala territory.
country. Oh yeah.
Based on, the results we have coming in so far.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, he's way ahead. Someplace like Harmer, he's way ahead with 75% of the vote. I mean, it's, so these are the kinds of
He's
things.
at 75. Is that where he's at? In Harmer? Because
74.2 in Harmer. I'm looking.
So
at
that's
right here.
interesting to me, because he did about that in the primary in those areas of the valley. He got about between 75 and 80. And I would have expected the Republican straight ticket vote to carry him to a higher level. So that's interesting to see if Lisa, if he keeps performing at the same level he performed at in the primary, but Lisa outperforms in the city what Tehran did, then, this gets to be a much closer race.
Yeah, and we're talking places like Fraser, East Deer.
Now, Fraser, that's going to be ridiculous, Zappala, right?
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
that's
it's gonna be
70,
absurd.
that's almost 77% there.
What was it?
Almost 77.
Really?
76.
See, I would have expected him to take Frazier by over 80.
76 and a half right now. I mean, this is of course,
But that actually
very early on, but it's but he's holding those sort of 65% or better in
Yeah.
all of those communities.
We got Jess Semler and Bethany Hellum on the phone. Jess just got her election results for
Great. We're gonna head to the phones. They're moving in closer. They're encroaching on us, but we're getting the messages. We got the phone callers coming in. And I wasn't going to remain professional for very long. We have on the phone with us, we have Pittsburgh current columnist and Etna Council candidate herself, Jess Semler, along with the Allegheny County Councilor at Large, Councilor-elect Bethany Hellum. Good evening. How are you guys tonight?
We are awesome. How are you guys?
Hey, Bethany.
Doing great. You're here with Erin McClelland,
Hey,
Charlie Deitch.
Bethany.
That was Erin McClelland. We actually did
We're
not
having fun. We're celebrating.
we did not give our Bethany a microphone tonight, so you're gonna have to carry the torch.
No, Bethany, you're stuck with Erin McClelland. I'm sorry.
I figure I'm loud enough. We don't need microphones, right?
No, not at all. In fact, I think I hear you through the window, not actually through the phone.
Yeah, we're actually in Station Square right now, and I think my voice is echoing up to your studio.
It probably is.
I think so.
So, Bethany, you
We're in
obviously
the best
knew.
sound room we could find. We're in the Buckhead's bathroom.
Yeah.
Oh, that's where I like to celebrate a big win myself.
The only way to do it. Yeah?
I've actually had many victories in there myself. Most of them gastrointestinal. I want to be clear.
Wow, this went down real fast.
Bethany Hellum and I we did John McIntyre's show a few weeks ago, and it was it was a lot of fun. But again, there's no there's no common courtesy right there between what we're saying. So common courtesy to each other, because we both know the lines, as in there aren't any, right, Bethany?
Yeah, there are absolutely zero lines. That's what's important to remember.
Bethany, what was today like for you? You knew, I mean, obviously going in, you knew, and you've been preparing to take this seat since the spring. But what was today like for you? Was it a victory lap? Were you out doing campaigning for other folks? What was your day like?
I spent the entire day at my poll working for the down ballot races in my area. I live in Ross Township. So like you said, the nice thing was I knew that I won in May. So instead of campaigning for myself since May, I've been knocking doors all around the county for county council races, for school board races, for borough council races. And then today was just nice to see a lot of my supporters at my poll, and then to help share my victory with the local candidates that I was supporting too. So it was awesome. It was a lot of, I'm so excited to vote for you today. A lot of people calling me, telling me good luck, and people who didn't know that I won already. But it was just, it was really, really cool. I think a lot of people still don't know that I win already, but it's awesome because it's so exciting. Like, I walked into the party tonight and I said to Jess, I was like, I think we both won. And zero results have been reported yet, but I'm pretty sure me and Jess both get to be victorious tonight.
Yeah, I was definitely ready to call Bethany's race at about 2:30 this afternoon. I was a little, because you never know. They might come back and say, oh, I don't know,
Yeah, but I just really want to see a big margin between myself and the Republican at large.
Right.
Just for my own personal gain.
Right. Yeah, for your own personal ego, Bethany wants to kill.
Exactly.
She wants to defeat the world. And Jess, congratulations, I understand, are in order as well.
I did. Yes. I won. I'm very, very excited.
And as like I said, some of you know, people know Jess far more than just as a Pittsburgh Current columnist. She's been a longtime advocate for women's reproductive health and LGBTQ rights. And we've been so lucky to have her for probably going on 6 months or so now as one of our featured columnists here in the Pittsburgh Current. Jess, what kind of spurred you to get into Etna Council? What spurred you to kind of take that step to get into public life?
I never thought I would be someone that would be running for office ever,
Right.
because I'm very, very loud and outspoken about everything, which is something you don't often see from elected officials
Right.
unless they're Bethany Hallam.
Right.
But basically, a spot opened up. And I've told so many of my friends and so many women in my life, if you have a chance to run, you need to just do it, because there is a man somewhere who is less than half as qualified as you, who's not asking himself these questions if he's ready. So you need to do it. So when I found out that there was a slot available on Etna Borough Council, I thought I have to take my own advice and I have to do this because I need to prove it to myself too. And so that's why I decided to run.
Hey, Jessica, it's Erin McClelland. How are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
What up, Erin?
Hey, girl. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Folks, that's Bethany Hallam, for those of you that don't know.
So, no, Jessica, now that you won, what can we look forward to from you? What are you excited to do?
I'm really, really excited to get more folks involved in local government. And one of the things that I was most excited to do is introduce an LGBT ordinance for my borough, and in conjunction with Sharpsburg and Millville, who we do different things together. We've seen so many things fall through the cracks when it comes to LGBT rights on a state level, obviously a national level. And so I think now municipalities have a really unique opportunity to take a stand for folks' human rights. And so that's what I'm looking forward to do.
Great. Bethany, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
You ran on a very, very aggressive, unapologetic criminal justice reform platform, but you had to do that throughout the county, and you had to go to places like the suburbs where that messaging, they're really not primed for that yet, but you still did really well, and you were able to unseat a longtime incumbent. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to make that message resonate? So like in the Alley-Kiski Valley, where somebody like Steve Zappala in the primary got 75 to 80% of the vote, you were able to knock it down so your opponent only got around 50% and really shore up that margin. And you did it on a criminal justice reform message. Can you talk about how you were able to do that?
Yeah, I think something that was really important, I was just myself from day one. So every single room I walked into, I didn't have to put on a show. I didn't have to, feed into any audience that I was in. I was able to just be myself and speak from my experiences, and people related to that. If there was even if there was one single point about my story that resonated with them, they had someone in their family who struggled with addiction. They had someone in their family who was incarcerated either now or in the past, or even their tax dollars were going towards people who were wasting away in the county jail. That resonated with people, and there's so many different aspects of our criminal justice system that people see firsthand that are broken. And I think that people were just ready for a change. And I had a lot of really badass women in my life, yourself included. I don't know if anybody ever knows the story. I'm not a crier. First time I ever heard Erin McClelland speak at a rally, and I had tears in my eyes because she was so real and invoked this passion from people about workers' rights and unions and blue collar voters. And so when I was going out and speaking, it was the same sort of thing. It was something that I'm passionate about. And I think I evoked this reception from people that she's real, she means it. She's not in this for any other reason other than to help the people that she represents. And I think that's what did it.
Well, I absolutely feel that you were the standout Democrat of this year. I thought, you defeated every part of the machine. You just went out there. You ran an amazing race. You were not funded. You didn't have a ton of staff. You were just out there really talking and creating a narrative around yourself that was just stunning. And like I said, you did it in a place that would be very, very hard to do. And nobody before you has done. You changed the narrative. You shifted criminal justice reform as a message into a place that it's never been before. So congratulations on your victory. And I'm so excited to see what you're going to be up to next once you take office.
Thank you, Erin. I am so excited too. And I was so fortunate that Jess and I were just talking about this before we got on the phone with you guys. And I had so many friends who were on the ballot with me today, all across the county, all across the state, to be completely honest, of just people who I consider friends of mine, mentors, just people who, whenever I was having a bad time on the campaign trail or whatever, I was so stressed and didn't know if it was ever going to be to get any better. I had so many people, especially women, that I could just bounce it off of and be like, hey, I'm going through this. How are you feeling? And so I think that was so important that there was such a faction of young progressive women running for office this cycle. And to be able to have that as a support system really changed the game for me, because Erin, I don't have to tell you, this is tough, right? It's tough running for office, and people, especially to young women and progressive women, they don't treat us the best when you're in this old boys club of politics in Allegheny County. And so I just every day think about how grateful I am that I had so many people in the support system who were going through the same thing as me at the same exact time. And tonight we're all celebrating together. So I that's more than I could ever ask for.
Well, and I think not to there's also the Bethany Hallam effect that I think is already, because we've had on our weekly podcast Jessica Benham, who's running against Harry Reedshaw. Jessica campaigned for you, Bethany, right? She was sort of
knocked that whole district for me single-handedly. She coordinated the canvases. She was out on the doors herself. She was a huge help to me.
Yeah, and I think that, you're seeing you and what you were able to do, and that you were just unapologetically going for it. I think it kind of gave her the thought, as she told me, she's like, I kept thinking, oh, someone will run. And then I thought, well, the hell with that. I'll just run myself. And I think that's kind of where you were, right? It was, why wait for someone else to do the job that needs done? Is that kind of the idea, right?
Exactly. I realized that county politics were the way to affect the changes that I saw were most needed for the people in our community. And no one was stepping up to challenge somebody who had never been challenged. And so, as Jess mentioned earlier, as women, we always think, oh, I can't possibly be qualified for this, or I couldn't possibly win this. But there's always some dude who isn't qualified, who isn't willing to put in the work, who thinks that he is deserving of the seat. And I think we showed that it's just about believing in yourself and believing that you are the best person to represent the people of your community. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And that's what people want. I can't wait to get to work. January 2nd, swearing in. I'm ready to go.
I also, by the way, thank you guys for calling in Jessica Semler and Bethany Hallam. And I will say, aside from beating John DeFazio in an election, I also knew you could take him 2 out of 3 falls in a wrestling match too, which is John's fallback career.
I'd definitely be up for that. I proposed that a couple times. He wasn't really feeling it, but if you can make it happen, Charlie, I'm in.
He wouldn't debate you, so you may as well just get in the ring.
Just
right?
a steel cage match.
Jess, Bethany, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you guys tonight, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, guys.
Bethany Hallam is shot out of a cannon. It doesn't matter what time of day you call Bethany Hallam. She's just shot out of a cannon all the time.
She's always that upbeat. She's always that positive. She's always that gracious and thankful, and she's such a dynamic person.
Yeah. I want to just piggyback on something that Bethany said, and this is not me. I'm not kissing your ass or anything here. But when I first met Erin, she jumped into a race that everyone had decided that a white man was going to run for, and she jumped in the race. And we're not going into the specifics, but you jumped in the race and you asserted yourself. And I think probably fortunately for you, I think that people who've watched you kind of come in at that time, you were also maybe just a little ahead of the curve because you really like opened some eyes about like, oh, she's not here to fuck around. Erin McClelland is here because she knows she belongs here. And I think there's always that with all candidates, but especially from what I've seen covering over the years, women candidates, there's always sort of like almost like there had been an apologetic sort of thing along with their, oh, if it's okay with you, I'd like to talk to you about this, And you were just there and like, if I'm going to run, I'm going to fucking run.
Yeah, and when I ran, that was pre-Trump, so
yes.
you did not
right.
have women were not voting for women then. We had no women in Congress
right.
back then, so it was a very, very different world. The activism that you see now, the donor base, the small dollar donor base, none of that existed. And yeah, when I jumped in and said I'm running for this, I mean, everybody said, who the hell do you think you are?
Right.
Including my opponent, who used to refer to me. It was Jack Murtha's former staffer, and he was 82, and he said he jumped in the race because he saw what was in the race, and he kept referring to me as what was in the race. And it was unbelievable. I'll never forget. We were at a debate. And afterwards, he demanded that my body be searched for microphones. And that actually got printed in the press because all the press was there. And they're like, yes, then there was the first debate conspiracy where I had to take off my jacket and show that I didn't have a microphone on because, as he said, no woman could come up with answers that fast. And he said that.
That's amazing.
So it's a little bit better now than it was then. Not much, but it's a little better.
Yeah. Well, compared to that, it's a whole lot better. It's still pretty, it's definitely still not, it's not like, I still think there's probably a contingent of what we refer to as the old boys network who still thinks, oh, this is all just a fad,
No, there's still a wait your turn mentality.
Sure.
And who do you think you are? And we can't have this. And you're out of control. You're unpredictable, kind of thing. And people like Bethany and me, and we're both very similar in that. We just don't care.
We are a few minutes away from Allegheny County Executive Rich Fitzgerald calling in. So let's talk about some city results now that I've gotten my bearings here. So I'm looking at the Parks Amendment or the Parks referendum. It's currently sitting, and we've got about half the precincts in at this point, and it's about 51.6% for and 48.3% no on the referendum that would raise about $10 million a year for maintenance as well as capital improvements in the park. And you can go to PittsburghCurrent.com. I did cover this, talk to many folks on both sides of the issue. So I mean, it's still obviously I think way too early to tell how that's gonna shake out. But are you surprised that it's close?
I honestly didn't know where this was going to go.
Right.
You just never know. So, nothing would surprise me at this point. I didn't really have a prediction. I assumed that it would be very likely to pass on just the basic messaging of it.
Sure.
But, the city of Pittsburgh's a very high information voter base. So, I think that some people coming out and a lot of the social media activity saying, wait a second, we're all for parks, but come on now.
Right.
How's this going to be handled? And I don't know that the children's fund and that dynamic help because I think they're going to start to get desensitized as we just like start voting this stuff down. So who knows? Yeah.
I grew up in Ohio where if the school wanted to raise your property taxes, if the county wanted to raise your property taxes, everything was on a referendum. So then when I, got out of Ohio and started going other places, living other places, working other places, and I saw, hey, wait, how the hell does, your county council, your school board, how do they decide what your tax rate is? But when I think about growing up in just some pretty poor school conditions because, there was no way to get more money. And so, referendums. So I think that there is sort of, when we see referendums now, I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword because people are like, well, if we can't get the money, these are people who think we can't get the money elsewhere. So they're sticking up for us and they're coming out for us. Mm-hmm. But then there's the other hand who says, hey, don't we already have a process for this, which we've talked about already. But,
sure.
And it'll be interesting to see if this is something we're going to see more of in the future around here, folks jumping up and taking their financial woes into their own hands. And
I think is the more that you see especially people like Mayor Peduto that are constantly looking at private sector solutions to public sector problems. These are the type of things you're going to see. If we can't solve a public sector problem with a public sector solution, then we start looking at foundations, we start looking at privatization, we start selling away the will of the voter. And that is very, very dangerous. I mean, we fought so hard in this country to get away from privatized fire departments and Tammany Hall kind of politics. We fought to get away with that to make certain utilities a product of the state. And now we're resorting to putting that all back in the hands of corporations. And we got away from that once. I'd hate to see us go back to it, but that's where we're heading. Right.
And I think that's where a lot of people are. And, look, I've because I wrote about it, I looked at, I did look at what the Parks Conservancy put out, and there are some things in there that you say, well, they have a priority list, they have a capital improvement priority list, they have, the city still has to approve the money, but once it happens, like it's really you really don't have you've got their word, which is you've got them down in paper, But it's still at some point it could still be you're still kind of almost hoping a little bit on goodwill. It's not, and privatization has taken on such a different. I mean, we used to think about privatization meaning, okay, I'm taking this county prison or this county jail and I'm leasing it out to a private company. But there's so many nuances to privatization.
No, we're looking at privatizing water and sewage and schools. I mean, it's literally everything that we do in the public sector is being hijacked by corporations. And it really scares me what that looks like.
You are listening to Pittsburgh Current Election Night Live with Erin, McClelland, Charlie Deitch. We are going to take just a very, very short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about these results, and we will have Allegheny County Chief Executive Rich Fitzgerald on the phone. Welcome back to Pittsburgh Current Election Night Live. Erin McClelland and Charlie Deitch here. We've been talking politics and we've been talking elections because what the hell else are we going to talk about tonight? It is election night. First, I want to say, Erin, thanks for coming on with us tonight. It has been great, and I hear there are a couple things going on next year election-wise that maybe you and I can.
There might be an election next year. I think there's something that people can pay attention to.
Couple things. A dog catcher, I think, finally is coming up. We want to go a little bit national here for a moment. It appears as it's been called Kentucky governor's race. Republican Governor Matt Bevin has been defeated by Democrat Andy Beshear, despite sort of a last-minute Hail Mary yesterday from the Orange Wonder in the White House. Governor Matt Bevin, so Kentucky governor's mansion is turning blue. So that is a good sign. And they're also Virginia is another close one, and we're following that one for you too. Erin, how much these governor's races that we have tonight? How much are these, if they are at all? Are they a hardbanger at all for next year? Are they any kind of telltale for us?
I mean, they do say something. In this particular race, in the Kentucky race, so you had a sitting governor that was stunningly unpopular. I think he was at like a 56% disapproval rating. So he was not doing well there. And the candidate he was up against, that gentleman had great name recognition. His father had been, I believe, a 2-term governor. So, and I think in that one, you see a lot of messaging. It was healthcare and education was the primary messaging that they ran in that race. And what we know is when Democrats stick to the 4 pillars of the Democratic Party, education, healthcare, infrastructure, jobs, we can win. A lot of those votes are persuadable. So, I mean, I don't think anybody thought Kentucky was going to go blue.
Right.
But I mean, it's a great win. It really, really is. It was a great Democratic candidate, a great message, a very, very bad sitting governor. So you had a nice perfect storm, very much like the first Connor Lamb race. You had a great perfect storm. So this was a well-run race, obviously, and had good messaging and everything aligned for it. So not a winnable district normally, a district that Trump won by 30.
Right.
But it says something that he wasn't able to consolidate this and solve those problems. So, and it's always fun to see how Trump reacts whenever he backs a loser. That's always entertaining to me.
Well, he will not have backed a loser. He will have said nothing
that
about
was
that
fake
guy.
News.
That guy was secretly a Democrat, and it's funny. We were going to talk about this a little later, but we could talk about it now since you brought up Connor Lamb. I was at the president's speech at the Shale Insight Conference.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Jake and I were there. We did get to see when the president was shouted down by some Jewish protesters who were there.
Oh, nice.
The whole speech was just sort of he was smugger, if that's a word, and smarmier than normal. And it was just, well, he's in his element. He's there with his big money donors, plus he's there with the shale industry, and he can come in and talk about how natural gas he's saved us all by rolling back every protection that we have,
every environmental reform known to man.
Exactly. But one thing the president said, and one thing you and I talked about before we came on the air tonight, was so Connor Lamb, of course, was kind of the, he ran well in Trump country. And a lot of that we know is because he didn't talk about Donald Trump much, if at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah, and even in the impeachment inquiry, he was very late to the party saying, okay, look, I think we should probably move ahead with this. And now you're seeing all these negative Connor Lamb ads that are out now. They're already hitting him. And that's because Connor Lamb will have so the president actually made this announcement, but it's been floating around a little bit. Sean Parnell, war veteran, author, right-wing darling, is going to run against Connor Lamb. And you told me about this, and like I said, the president announced that the president is very excited. He's very excited.
He's very excited.
Very excited. Talk a little bit about what you know about Sean Parnell, and that district has changed a little since you ran for it.
It's changed a ton. It was an R11 district when I ran it.
Correct.
It's a 50-50 district now.
Exactly.
That Connor Lamb won handily. And in that race, that's interesting because you have they completely changed the layout of the district. It is full of river mill towns now.
Yeah.
Where before it went to Johnstown and Somerset County and up to Lawrence County and Beaver. So now it's just Allegheny and Beaver. And it was one that Connor won well. He had just come off a great victory, close victory against Rick Saccone, who really sort of spoon-fed that win. I mean, we couldn't have asked for anybody better. Right. And then goes into Keith Rothfuss, who, I know personally isn't the greatest candidate to go up against. And you give a fair district. And I laughed after that happened and said, the legislature giveth, but the Supreme Court taketh away.
Right.
And boy, did they. They ripped that right out from under him.
Yeah.
And Connor won it handily. He won it on a nice blue-collar working class message talking about education, healthcare, infrastructure, and jobs. And I think he's going to do that again. I think he's been fairly good on his voting record. I obviously you're going to have a lot of progressives, especially in like areas like the North Hills, really gnaw at him a little bit, and it's up to the party to remind them of what the alternative is. And to say, this is the district he's in, this is the way he needs to vote, this is what's going to keep him in office, and that's going to be a heck of a lot better than Sean Parnell. But there's no doubt that Sean Parnell is going to be, a hell of a candidate, I think.
What do you know about him in terms of what you've seen, in terms of he's charismatic, he's
charismatic, good looking,
he's a handsome
service.
fella. Yeah, he's got credentials when it comes to the military.
Yeah.
And those are things that, even in that district that is 50-50, those are things that play, that play in those areas.
Yeah, he cancels, he has a lot of the same assets that Connor has. What I will say that when I saw Sean Parnell first interviewed, what did surprise me was he really just fell back on the talking points. I expected something a little more dynamic. He didn't really put that out there. So but he does have a nice big donor base. He's a published author.
Yeah.
He does a lot on Fox News. So he has national recognition. So I think that congressional race is going to be huge. It's going to be one to watch. And, Connor will have a race, but I have a lot of confidence. And I've really seen, the way he's grown as a candidate from when he started. He's amazing on the stump now. He's charismatic. He's funny. He's really great to watch.
we're landing planes or Rich Fitzgerald is on the phone. I think County Executive Rich Fitzgerald is on the line with us. Rich, you're here with Charlie Deitch and Erin McClelland. How are you doing on election night here tonight?
Doing good. I'm sorry, who's there?
Charlie Deitch and Erin McClelland.
Oh, okay. Good to talk to you guys. We got a little excitement here. We had Vice President Biden's here at the IBEW Union Hall. So, as you can imagine, there's a lot of
right.
a lot of folks want to talk to the Vice President.
Yeah, Rich, we love you and all, but if you could pass the phone to Joe.
People away from him, maybe we could. But as of now, I think there's a lot of people want their picture with him and want to talk to him.
Yeah, Rich. So your race, running against Matt Droz, who, and I'm not. You can't say this without it sort of coming out with a chuckle, but he's been known through this race to be standing on the side of the road with his signs. Matt is a former county councilor. Maybe not the worry. Did you have the same worry with your opponent this time as you have had? You definitely have had some races in the past. What was your strategy going into the general here?
Well, my strategy all along for the last 8 years has really been to talk about a vision and performance. And I think, starting with the 12 years I spent on county council, moving things forward, and then when I ran for county executive 8 years ago, it was really, for me, about jobs and economic growth. Having seen what we've gone through in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, to see the economic growth we have now, that's what I pushed for. And all the things that I've tried to do, improving transit, improving the airport, improving our park system, quality of life, all these type of things are the things I've tried to do. And that's what I want to do in the last 4 years.
Rich, talk a little bit about you certainly early on in your political career, there was obviously, there was a lot of movement on doing natural gas drilling in county parks and at the airport and so forth. Recently, the mayor came out at a conference and talked about, not really having the need here for petrochemical jobs. And you disagree with him a little bit about that. What is your take sort of on where did that come from the mayor? And I assume that's a stance that you don't agree with.
Well, first of all, and I've said this very, very vocally, no city has benefited more from the shale revolution than Pittsburgh.
Right.
And Pittsburgh City, Pittsburgh, the county, and the Western Pennsylvania region. And we've seen it when we get a job like Shell coming in here, bringing $7 billion worth of wealth from an international company that flows into Pittsburgh is really important. And we will create a manufacturing hub here that will deal with plastics. Now, having said that, I am a big believer in climate change. We've got to start to deal with fossil fuel and in reducing our carbon footprint. And that's one of the great things that natural gas has done, because when we've seen power plants convert from coal to natural gas, that's a 40% reduction in carbon footprint going off into the atmosphere. For oil, it's about a 30% reduction in the carbon emissions that go on. So we've got to do it right. Absolutely, we've got to hold these companies accountable, hold their feet to the fire. But I think we can be profitable in jobs and creating jobs, particularly in places like Beaver County, Washington County. They're not going to have a Google or an Argo AI or some of the other companies that we see moving into what we call the university district around our universities, Google, Facebook, Apple, et cetera. They're going to be in Lawrenceville. They're going to be in Oakland. They're going to be in East Liberty and in the Strip District. So we've got to have a broad-based economy that deals with robotics and finances and energy and eds and meds and logistics and all the type of things that go on. So that's my goal, is to work with all sectors of industry and move this region forward.
Rich, we had a question from Facebook, one of our social media channels. Someone asked about, and you actually mentioned it before I could ask you about it, but reconciling some advertising you've done, and what you just talked about reducing the carbon emission footprint on the county. and still sort of back the idea of natural gas drilling, fracking, and so forth. Are you comfortable that? I mean, are you comfortable that that's that you are able to do that? I mean, obviously there are folks who disagree with you that you're actually able to reduce a carbon footprint by through shale drilling and so forth. But are you? Is that something that you believe in?
I believe in it. It's scientific fact. I mean, it doesn't about me believing it or not believing it. We know that natural gas burns 30% less carbon emissions than oil and almost 40% less carbon emissions than coal. It's not about having an opinion. It's about scientific fact. So, these type of things are important. Now, I talk about reducing our carbon footprint, and I can tell you that 35% of the energy that we buy to heat and light our buildings is bought by renewables, solar and wind. And we're looking to maybe do hydro in the future that would also maybe get that above 50%. So if we can do 50% of the county facilities and reduce that percentage, look, it's not going to solve everybody's problem. We get that this is a global issue, but it talks about our commitment to what we are going to do here locally. We were one of the first signatories to the Green Building Alliance, and I'm proud of the fact that Allegheny County and Pittsburgh has a higher percentage of buildings, square footage of buildings, office buildings and commercial buildings under the 2030 goal and in place in the country. The fact that our convention center is the highest LEED certified convention center in the country. Our NHL arena, where the Penguins play, PPG Paints Arena, the highest LEED certified building. So we're leading in many, many ways. And I'm proud of the fact that we're one of the greenest places around. And you look at PNC, one of our biggest employers in downtown Pittsburgh. They built the greenest skyscraper in the world down on 5th and Wood a couple of years ago, and have, I think, over 1,000 of their buildings across the country, across their footprint, are green buildings. So there's just a lot of good things that are happening, and we'll continue to have these discussions around natural gas, fossil fuels, and as we moving towards improving our carbon footprint in the future. It's something I'm committed to, and we'll continue to work towards that.
Right. Rich, where do you see room for production of renewable energy sources in Allegheny County? Is there room for that? And is that something that you've seen, that you've been pursuing? Is that something that you see that also could be something that Allegheny County strives for?
Well, it's one of the things, and I'll just give you an example. So out at the airport, we're going to be building a microgrid, a cogeneration plant, in which we're going to be providing, using the natural gas that we have out there to provide electricity, but also we're going to provide a large percentage with solar panels. We're going to have the largest solar farm in Allegheny County. Is going to be at our airport with 7,800 solar panels. So it's a mix of what we're going to do and what we're going to prove how we can do things. Now, one of the things around solar, I hope solar continues to flourish. Sometimes the problem is the payback, the economics of it.
Sure.
We need to keep moving forward, and some of this has to be, dealing with the carbon tax at the federal level that Congress is looking at, because right now, obviously, the economics are going to work for gas just because the cost of natural gas is very, very low. So you're going to see a lot of folks who are buying their energy are going to want to go that way. So finding that balance is not as easy as sometimes we'd like to make it happen.
Rich, before I let you go, what are your goals for the next term? Do you have sort of an agenda that you're looking at, or is it more of building on what you've already done?
Well, I want to certainly build on what we've done. I think the momentum, we want to continue that to happen. We've created a place now that there is hope for young people. For so many years, parents were resigned to the fact that when their kids grew up here and graduated from school, they would be leaving. And we saw that happen for decades in Pittsburgh. That's changed right now. There's opportunities in this region right now, and we're going to continue to see that. But we got to make sure we improve the transit system. I want to get that BRT that connects downtown and Oakland, our two biggest, bus rapid transit, to really improve that corridor right there. That will also make our environment much better as we move towards electric buses. I'd like to see much more on the electric buses for the 700 bus fleet we have at the Port Authority. Want to continue the momentum in the airport. Want to continue, cleaning up our environment, holding our industrial partners as well as everybody else accountable and improve the quality. And we've got to make sure that some of the communities that have been left behind, places like our old mill towns in our Vaughn and Allegheny Valleys, that they get some of the investment that we've seen in the North Hills, the city, the South Hills, and the airport corridor. So, we've got a lot of disparity with haves and have-nots in this region like we do nationwide, and we've got to help with skills and transportation to really connect people to the opportunities that are there. So that'll be my agenda, for the next 4 years. And again, working with all the partners in the private sector, our labor unions, our federal, state, and local officials. I kind of view that one of the jobs of the county executive has always been to kind of bring the region together and move forward. And that's what I want to continue to do.
Rich Fitzgerald, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Pittsburgh Current Election Night Live. Rich Fitzgerald returning to another term as Allegheny County Executive. Thank you very much for joining us. Get back to Uncle Joe
Thanks,
there.
guys. Have a good night. Take care. Bye-bye.
So that's always you want to get Rich Fitzgerald excited? Let's talk about fracking.
Let's talk about fracking.
And also, no matter what side of the, I'm not on, necessarily on that side of the issue, but he's certainly passionate about it, and we'll fight those early hearings, those early decisions, and defend them to the death. So, conviction. Certainly. when you're married to it, you stick with it. But Rich Fitzgerald for a third term as Allegheny County Chief Executive. So looking here, and just to kind of bring you up to speed, clearly Rich Fitzgerald is he's probably about 2/3 of the vote in. Rich Fitzgerald, almost 71% of the vote. Chelsea Wagner very handily, almost 66% of the vote, beating Brooke Naddenley, and I think it's pretty safe to call most of these races. And we're still looking at this district attorney race, but it does appear as though it is pulling away more and more for Stephen Zappala over Lisa Middleman. Most of the city precincts are in.
So that just leaves the suburbs, and those
right.
are going to go. Though I'm looking at some of the numbers, and Lisa did perform better in the suburbs than I would have expected
right.
her to. It just wasn't enough to compensate for the losses there, and I have to look at some of the city numbers to see, but
right. Yeah, I'm not sure if
like it's going to happen.
Yeah, and there is where is this that it does look like the 14th ward went for Stephen Zappala. So he does have. Stephen Zappala has made the 14th ward. Let me see what the totals are. Pittsburgh Ward 14, District 41 is going. I can't see the totals on that, but yeah, Stephen Zappala is ahead, at least at the moment, there in 14th Ward, District 41. And then, again, as you look out into the northern parts of the county, the east, and now it's starting, as we're getting results in from the west and the northwest of the county, I can't imagine there being anything working out for Lisa Middleman there. There are some sporadic suburbs where it looks like here and there she's won some of those areas, but it doesn't look. It looks like it's almost a foregone conclusion. I think that Stephen Zappala will return as the Allegheny County District Attorney. And moving over to the city races, and we have a lot of these votes are in. A lot of these precincts have reported, and that is not the city, folks. This is the county map, and most people don't want to see how the sausage is made, but I like to show the people, Erin, how the sausage is made. That's how I've sort of. I like to show people the train wreck. That's sort of how I made my bones in this business. So we're looking at 386 out of 402 precincts reported in the city of Pittsburgh. We're looking at 51.38% of the vote for the Home Rule Charter Amendment to back the parks. To 48.62%, and we're looking at a spread of not even 2,000 votes at this point. There are still some areas to come in the city. But yeah, it's this one is still, I think, too close to call. I think someone who knows better may have a better.
So I'm
feel
looking
for that. Yeah, go ahead.
at the 14th ward precinct by precinct, and it is absolutely apparent that Lisa Middleman did win the 14th ward.
The whole 14th ward. Okay,
Yeah.
precinct by yeah. I'm sorry. When I saw that at first, I just sort of saw 14th. Yes.
Yeah.
That particular district, right? Stephen Zappala had, but yeah, you're right. Overall, she did win the 14th
she
ward.
really.
Yes. Not exactly. Don't want to.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, but again, it's tough to overcome that, and it'll be interesting to see. I think when we break down these results, to see what how important those Republican votes were. How important are you getting any kind of sense yet, or you've got to think that.
I mean, obviously, if you have, and I have to look and see where the Republicans voted straight ticket, but they're most likely going to go that way as opposed to somebody that's running to the left. So those are going to be valuable. But it looks like she's, percentage wise, she's going to do better than Tehran did at 41%,
right.
Which, considering the time period that she had is. Actually, it probably shows closer to what Tehran would have gotten if he hadn't had the stumbles early on.
Right.
So, and it does make an argument that with a little bit more money, a little bit more time, and more of a media presence, it might have been, a lot closer.
Yeah. And going into these the city races, so a very interesting thing in District 9 City Council. Reverend Ricky Burgess will return to his seat. That's 100% of those precincts reporting. Just a little over 40%, almost 41% of the vote. But what we see here is we see Randall Taylor and B. Denise Welch. I mean, they almost right down the middle split a vote here that would have, and yeah, you can't say that every one of those votes would have gone one way or another, but certainly could have narrowed it a bit. And that's interesting, very interesting, I think. But you see this time and time again, don't you, where you have all of these candidates, they all have the same goal, but they want to be the one that, takes it out. What are your thoughts on?
Well, you really want to see what that looks like? Wait till you see next year's Democratic primary.
Right.
You're going to see exactly
right.
what happens when you have that many candidates in a field. I mean, and I'm sure we're going to see some attrition with the existing candidates, but I think we're going to come down to, at least 3 or 4 main candidates that are still going to be there and possibly send us into a split convention, and very likely send us into a split convention. So you're going to see that next year.
Talking a little bit about 2020, as if you want to get your I'm with Biden t-shirts autographed, head down to IBEW on the south side. Uncle Joe is apparently down there.
Apparently.
Photos. Where are you, and either what you're seeing or personal, where are you sort of, where are you, maybe where you see yourself leaning a little bit in the Democratic primary, and where do you have any kind of clue on where this thing might go?
I'm leaning toward not reelecting Donald Trump. That is precisely where I'm leaning toward.
Yeah.
So I'm really not.
I know who I'm voting for next November. I don't know who I'm voting for.
I mean, you could run a folding chair against him, and it wouldn't matter to me.
Yeah.
I'm really not that concerned about the primary, because I think a lot of it is half dozen of one, 6 of one, half dozen the other. I don't see Biden surviving past February, only because of money.
Yeah.
His donor base is high dollar donors. And so there's only so many of them. Once they all get maxed out, because we have federal limits in a presidential race, then where does he go? Where Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg have just a cash cow ATM of small dollar donors, millions of them pouring money. And that's precisely what we saw with Hillary.
Right.
She was started, remember, against Obama. Her donors were maxed out. She was running out of money. She's putting money in her own campaign. So I think that is going to be an issue. Unless he really lights up Iowa, then it's possible that he builds a donor base. But I don't know about that. So I think you're going to end up with an Elizabeth Warren or a Bernie Sanders ticket. There is, I think, a better mathematical argument for Bernie Sanders than there is over Elizabeth Warren. If you look at the 2016 primary map, it is stunning. What you see is Bernie wins the whole Rust Belt. Hillary wins the whole South. Well, that doesn't mean anything to me
right.
in a general, because those are all gone.
Right.
And you know where the Northeast is going to go. You know where California is going to go. The question is, where does the Rust Belt go?
Right.
Bernie kills it in the Rust Belt. She doesn't win a single precinct or a single county in Wisconsin, and yet doesn't go there. She doesn't win a single county in West Virginia. Barely, doesn't attend there. So, and then you see Pennsylvania, where Bernie kills it in the center of the state, and she wins the areas that are going to go D anyway.
Right.
So there is a compelling argument for a Bernie Sanders candidate. The other question is in this climate and in this time, is America ready for a woman, and is Elizabeth Warren that woman?
Right.
I don't know. My bigger concern is what's happening in the meantime. And if you look at the voter registration numbers since 2016, if you take 11 counties in western Pennsylvania and you throw Philly in just for fun and Erie, you get a net registration growth for Republicans of 82,000.
Wow.
They have registered 82,000 voters, or more than we have. And like I said, that's just western Pennsylvania. And I threw Philly in for fun because Philly actually netted 15,000 Republican. So anybody that says that the Philly registration is going to counteract that, no, they're going more R2.
Right.
So that's the big issue that we face in Pennsylvania. And in a race as tight as it was in 16, if we don't solve the bleeding of Democrats, the registration of new Republicans, we are going to have a serious challenge. And I don't care what the polls say. This is not a national election. It's an electoral college. So I don't care what the popularity is in the polls. I care what state you win. That's how this works. And a lot of these states are winner take all. So I don't care if our nominee gets, a single vote. If you lose, you lose.
You think Trump's going to see and there has to be a I hope anyway, a loss of Republican voters, at least some Republican voters who are real. There are obviously, as with any candidate, there are folks who
attrition,
that this isn't what they signed up for. The horseshit that we on the other side are like, how are people buying into this stuff? Mm-hmm. There are people on the other. I mean, it's naive for us to say that there are people that everybody on the other side, as you said earlier, that everybody on the other side is racist and stupid and chawing tobacco, and it's there are people over there on that side too that are just as upset about some of this stuff is that's gone on. So. I saw that, Jake. Thank you. I'm being snapped at, folks. So we have a phone call, but let me just finish up one. I have to give a shout out to our producer, Jake, Ms. Livchik, who did a nice job putting this all together with the set. I happened to mention about a week ago, hey, do you want to do this? And next thing I know, we're doing it. So this was all Jake's hard work, and he's a bit of a
Jake.
Bit of a jerk when it comes to stage direction, but he's been doing pretty well. But on the phone we have Bobby Wilson. Sorry, I didn't mean to yell that. But let's shout it from the mountaintops. Bobby Wilson, Council District 1 elect on the north side, defeated Darlene Harris, incumbent Darlene Harris in the spring. Bobby, how have you spent your election night tonight?
How am I spending it?
Yes.
No, we're at the Elks down at the on Cedar Avenue. So right down from Allegheny General Hospital. Yeah, everyone's excited.
So it's looking like I don't know from what I'm seeing here, most of the precincts are in. I mean, this looks like it's going to be a win for you. How concerned were you coming in with two opponents tonight? Did it change the way that you again, we talked earlier about Erin. You're here with Erin McClelland, by the way, Erin McClelland and Charlie Deitch. Normally, the city council races are done in the spring. How did you approach this campaign here in the fall? Were you, how much work did you put in, and how difficult did you find it dealing with two opponents?
Well, it was interesting because a lot of people didn't recognize that I still had a general election to get through. So there were several people that were reaching out that already want to have meetings in the future. And I said, about the future. And I said, well, I need to get through November 5th.
Right.
I'm continuing to door knock, people just didn't really understand. But what really happened was that the other candidate just ended up being like a Darlene 2.0. I mean, it really activated the same crowd, the exact same crowd that was big Darlene supporters. And so we ended up running a very similar strategy. So we had to fight the same fight again. Nothing new,
Bobby, Darlene served that district for a long time.
I'm sorry, can you hold on 1 second?
Yeah.
I'm live.
Folks, Bobby's live. We're going to ask you to step aside, leave Bobby alone while he talks on the phone.
I'm on a live thing or whatever because
I'm on a live thing or whatever.
There's a live thing going on. We've got connections.
Party, and I'm just saying, but
we've got connections over there at the Elks. We can have security help you out if you want. Sarah, take care of that. Some security over there for Bobby.
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with a loose conversation. I mean, people are leaving the party, and
absolutely,
I just want to say goodbye to them.
Absolutely.
But anyway, what's up?
So I was just going to say, you defeating Darlene in the spring, as you now head into your first term. What do you see as your responsibility? What do you think the constituents want to see out of you that they maybe weren't getting out of your predecessor?
Oh, making sure that everyone gets a voice on the north side. I mean, a lot of people say that term, get a voice, but I mean, there are so many people that wanted a change of leadership that was really going to look to people that have moved here in the past 2 years that are really interested in their community. I mean, let's activate these people to continue doing the good things that they do. I'm a fifth generation Northsider. We say that it's true, but there's not an ounce of me that is going to not welcome someone that comes here,
sure.
Within the past year or few months. I mean, everyone's got great ideas. Everyone's going to be a great volunteer. I really plan to work with everyone on the north side. There are some really great people that have moved here recently.
Great. Bobby, congratulations again. Thanks for taking the time to call in tonight. Take the time away from your event there tonight. Thank you so much for coming on. Congratulations with the win tonight.
Yeah, no problem. We're excited. Thanks for the call.
All right. Thank you, Bobby. That was Bobby Wilson, the replacement for outgoing city councilor Darlene Harris. Were you surprised when that happened in the spring? Darlene,
I was.
Yeah.
I was a little surprised to see that happen. Absolutely.
Because I think most people, Bobby was the mayor. Everyone will, but Bobby was the mayor's guy.
He was the
Bill
mayor's
Peduto's guy. He was the guy that was pushed there. But still, I think it's, I've seen, over the 20 years or whatever that I've covered the city, it's like, you think somebody's never leaving, and then all of a sudden there's that one. It was Darlene Harris on city council when I first moved to the city.
Sure,
actually, and so you have that. How do you see that changing the dynamic on city government in terms of pushback against the executive branch of city government? Because obviously, that's why we have a city council and a mayor, and Darlene was certainly one of the mayor's critics. So
yeah,
that's what I heard.
He took care of that problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I don't think that the mayor is going to be short on critics. I think he might have solved one problem, but I don't think that he's going to be lacking anytime soon. Right now, his biggest one is the county executive. So
exactly, and that's something that's very interesting. Something worth talking about is those are BFFs for life, and then this issue really, and it had always been there because you do have. They obviously were polar opposite when it comes to natural gas and fracking and so forth.
Yeah.
But it's the point where it finally is sort of going to drive a wedge between. Fitzpeduto. I don't know Fitzdudo. I don't know what their couple name is. Fitzdudo.
Yeah, Deb Gross is still there. She's going to keep doing, her thing and everything. So, it's not like that's all going to go away.
Yeah, Teresa Kale Smith is she's also been in The Voice.
Absolutely. So, I think Peduto's biggest problem is Peduto.
I would agree. No, I would totally agree.
So, the comments what's interesting is I thought that the comments he made, I know what he was trying to say.
Sure.
It was stunningly obtuse and indelicate, and really didn't have much semblance of reason to it. He was actually talking about taking jobs away from the fracking industry and giving them to coal miners, apparently placating the coal miner base in the city of Pittsburgh, which I'm just sure is robust.
Yeah, no, I've seen those. You haven't seen those guys walking downtown, walking into Starbucks.
I'm like, wow, he's pandering to coal miners. I don't even know what happened. And, as somebody who spends a lot of time with rural working class voters, I cringe, and I always say, does Bill Peduto know that every time he opens his mouth, rural Democrats sit there and go, maybe Trump's not so bad.
Right.
And like, please stop. But I mean, you look at what he was trying to say, and I know what he was trying to say.
Right.
And I actually give him some credit for making an argument that, look, jobs are important, but we also need to really start having a serious conversation about the environment. He just, like I said it in a very obtuse and indelicate way. On the other hand, Rich Fitzgerald did say one thing that I would like to really reinforce, and that is that this is a global issue, and where we are losing the environmental argument on the jobs end is you're having people in particularly the building trades who are getting this work, and they're saying, wait a second, why are we being asked to lose jobs? Why are you putting restrictions on us and further demands when you have China, doing all of this stuff? Now, what we are seeing is that, Russia just banned fracking. China is getting way better on environmental forms. This is becoming a global issue, but we do have to take some responsibility for it at a national level. What I would like to see the labor community do is start really talking about how skilled labor can do it better, healthier, safer, and cleaner, and really focus on that technology and market themselves that way, because it's really not justice to say we're going to worry about the air quality and the safety standards inside the plant, but not worry about air quality safety standards in the community around the plant. Air moves. So it's a discussion that needs to be had. And I'm a big building trades fan, and I want to make sure that they're all working and doing well. At the same time, I'd love to see them up their game a little bit on this. I mean, that's an opportunity.
Right. I mean, there is, and I knew about the plan at the airport with some solar panels and so forth. But my opinion, and you may disagree or you may agree, I don't know, but you haven't seen the push for bringing renewable energy manufacturing jobs to this region, to the county, as you have. I mean, listen, it's easy to frack. Everybody was, it's easy to find people who want to frack, put it that way. And so it's the easiest, quickest way, I guess, to try and make a couple dollars. But, I think that some people feel it's just a little disingenuous to talk about the importance of reducing the carbon footprint when you're
punching holes in the earth and creating earthquakes.
Exactly. Under county parks, and under runways and so forth. And so it's just, while I see where he's coming from. And I think let me say this. I think he's definitely sort of work new ways to spin that. I mean, now he's pro fracking, but he's talking about all these environmentally friendly issues. And so, but those are of course things that our friends at GASP and other places are going to be like, hold on a second, Rich. But it's.
Well, the issue with energy that's being missed is this is a trade issue. So, we looked back at the Obama administration and the investment in companies like Solyndra and solar. What happened with solar? Because we were investing government money, and we're up against China, who basically nationalizes whatever industry they decide they're going to destroy us on. So what they were doing is dumping tons and tons of capital at the government level into solar. And then when they were putting us out of business because there's no trade restrictions, there's no currency manipulation rules, then what they started doing is literally putting ours out of business, buying them, and then moving that technology to China. So our good technology was being shut down here because we couldn't sustain. We're blasting the Obama administration for putting some money in, but it was trickle financing compared to what China's doing. And we're playing on a different playing field because they are dealing with a completely different type of government, which, by the way, has no term limits. Like, this guy's going to be in office for as long as he wants to be there, and he's going to be able to take any amount of capital that his country can put into whatever industry he wants to maintain. And we have to start diving into the trade issue for real. And in 2021, when the next president is sworn in, we will be commemorating 50 years in a trade deficit in this country. 50 years, 1971, we went into a trade deficit. We are at a $750 billion trade deficit with China. There is not a solution in sight. There's not a discussion being had. There's not an argument being made. And until we do that, we will continue to fail. We will continue to not be able to move forward on renewables because we're going to get eaten alive by our global competition. That is standard, which is why the argument that Rich Fitzgerald is making holds water because we keep failing in alternative energy, and fracking's the only thing that's working. So until we start making an argument, come up with standards that are globally sustainable for all of us, we're not going to win this one.
Am I on? Jesus. No, just kidding. So it looks like everything is sort of wrapping up, and I do want to end tonight with some national stuff, but let's go over some things right now. For the Post-Gazette is calling the parks measure as a win for the four county parks for the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. While it was close, it appears as though they got the message out to enough people, or again, we're talking about the fact that when you look at 75 words, it says, parks. Don't you like your parks, dumbass? And
parks.
Like, oh yeah, I love my parks. And it's only $50.
Who doesn't love parks?
Right. And so it's interesting, and it's how these things, and again, I think that, so now we have the library measure that passed, and then we have the children's fund. Erin said,
the human fund.
The human fund earlier, and now I always want to call it that.
I know. I do that too.
And now, so we have this parks, and look, I mean, we're talking about $10 million a year, and all $750,000 is about was spent to get this resolution to pass. And so I think what we're going to see now is people are going to go on, and I urge you to go on the Parks Conservancy website, because they have a very detailed strategy on what they said that they're going to do with this money. So now I think it's up to, obviously, the voters to hold them accountable, and that the first 20 parks that see, really a nickel of this money needs to be these parks in these really underserved neighborhoods. So it'll be interesting to see. And do you think that this is going to potentially embolden other folks to give something like this a try?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I regardless, it's gonna keep going. Like I said, we're gonna keep doing this kind of stuff. And now that they've won, yeah, absolutely. And the city initiatives, this tends to work in the city. So that's where you're gonna see it. I don't know how the county ones are gonna keep working, since those haven't done well, but I think that the cities, they're finding that this is a way to go around the legislative process and create slush funds and all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah, and it's going to be, I think there has to be, and I think what will be interesting is the accountability in terms of our ability, as the ability of taxpayers and the ability of the media to be able to see how every dollar, every penny is being spent on this. And again, when I asked that question, as I did my story in this past issue, it was, we're going to be beholden to everyone else who gets public funds. So again, we've got, if you go out and you follow the and again, this isn't a judgment on anybody who worked on either side, but there is enough out there that I think that if things aren't really held to, the things that were put out before this election, I think that it's going to not only blow this out of the water. I think you're going to see this sort of just submarine any other kind of these type issues.
Yeah, your controllers get very, very important when these kind of things happen.
Yes.
Your city and county controller are going to be your watchdogs on this stuff. So.
And when you have several members of city council, when you have your controller, when you have folks on the school board, when you have folks, these are the folks who are saying, I don't think so. It's something you have to look at. So it's going to be interesting, to see just how closely this is watched and what it means for the future of for homeowners.
Yeah, exactly.
You're in the city of Pittsburgh. And then again, as we've said in the past 15 minutes or so, pretty much every contested race has been called. Steve Zappala will return to office, as will as we said, Rich Fitzgerald, Chelsea Wagner. So it was a good night for incumbents, but again, municipal elections aren't usually something that we're staring at. And then again, it was sort of a nice, I will say this about the Middleman Zappala race. It gave us something to look at and to write about. And what will be interesting again is, I think, to sit down and parse the data out and see, okay, I think someone who challenges Steve Zappala in the next Democratic primary,
Yeah.
if it comes to that, and I assume it will. I
Yeah.
don't know why he turned around now. I think it maybe there's a roadmap there or a way to.
Oh no,
go
there's
forward.
a roadmap. It's
Yeah.
a 55-44 race. It's probably going to stay there.
Yep.
Turnout was a little lower than the 26% that we had last time, and there's no doubt. If they would have had a more media savvy campaign and been more aggressive about it, they could have made a really compelling argument, and that race could have been won.
Yeah, no, it was.
There's no doubt that it was winnable.
Right,
in that time span.
right.
That's impressive.
And throughout the night, Erin and I and Kierran, we've talked about the shortcomings that this campaign had and some of the issues this campaign had. Again, I don't think more time would have necessarily helped them, but I think they needed a stronger infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
And they needed advisors who said, "You made this. People donated this money. Let's spend it and let's get the word out."
Yeah.
And so it. I think the next person is definitely going to have. I think that between the Jenkins race and this race, I think folks are really going to have the next challenger is really going to have a way.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. This is letting people know that this is a possibility. This is a county-wide race. It says a lot about the electorate too.
Yeah.
Of this county. And I always say this is a high information county. When
Yeah.
you have somebody that has a dog running against them getting a 30,000 undervote, that says something, that's big.
That dog was savvy. That dog, by the way, was all for renewable energy is what I
What
heard.
was the dog for renewable
Yes,
energy?
the dog was all
very
renewables.
moratorium.
Right. Yeah, the dog was like, I like to dig the holes, but I don't, fracking wasn't on his. So take the good and the bad. Erin McClelland, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
And I'm hoping this is like we did one last year at local along with Women for the Future of Pittsburgh, WTF, last year, and so we thought we'd try this. And I think we'll see you in the spring. I hope. And
Absolutely.
Come back and then in the fall, we'll definitely be doing this again. Thoughts on any surprises tonight? I don't really think so. I think that people definitely certainly wish that there were some surprises, but I think it all sort of. I think it made an otherwise dullish election a little more exciting. We gave something to watch, but I think it was pretty much what we intended.
No, absolutely. I don't think anything was a surprise.
And I think that this is what I'm going to work on before the next podcast. I never know when to call it quits, so we're going to say goodnight. Erin McClelland, Charlie Deitch. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This has been Election Night Live with the Pittsburgh Currents.